This is the story of how America was stolen, episode 17. What happened in Virginia did not stay in Virginia. The English response to native resistance, starvation, retaliation, land seizure, and permanent war became a successful model in the eyes of colonial leaders. And when something works for an empire, it spreads, fast. As news traveled back to Europe, other colonies watched closely. They studied Virginia's methods. They read reports not as warnings, but as instructions. Massacres were reframed as security. Land theft was reframed as settlement. Native resistance was reframed as hostility. And once the language changed, the conscience disappeared. Soon, colonies in New England, the Carolinas, and beyond began adopting the same approach. Expand aggressively, break treaties when convenient, punish resistance collectively, and erase native presence from valuable land. The blueprint was set. In New England, settlers arrived with a powerful new weapon: religious justification. They believed they were chosen, that God had given them the land, and that native people stood in the way of a divine mission. This belief was dangerous, because when violence is framed as God's will, there is no room for mercy. Native nations who had lived on the land for thousands of years were suddenly labeled heathens and obstacles to salvation. Their removal became not just acceptable, but righteous. And righteousness, when mixed with power, becomes unstoppable. The same pattern repeated everywhere settlers expanded. First came trade, then came settlement. Then came fences, then came demands. Then came violence. And when native nations resisted, as any people would, settlers pointed to that resistance as proof that the land must be taken by force. A perfect circle of justification. Native nations were not unaware of what was happening. Word traveled through trade networks, rivers, and generations-old paths. Stories of Virginia's destruction, of burned villages and broken treaties, reached tribes hundreds of miles away. And fear spread. Some tribes tried to prepare. Some tried to ally with European rivals like the French or Dutch. Some tried to avoid contact altogether, moving deeper into the interior. But there was no safe direction. Wherever settlers went, the same rules followed. By the late 1600s, colonial expansion had become organized theft. Land companies divided territories on maps before ever setting foot there. European kings signed charters granting ownership of land they had never seen and people they had never met. The native nations were not consulted. They were not acknowledged. They were not considered. They were erased on paper before they were erased in reality. What made this stage even more devastating was time. The settlers weren't rushing anymore. They were patient. They understood that even if resistance succeeded temporarily, waves of settlers would keep coming. Native nations were fighting generations of invasion with limited resources, while Europe could replace losses endlessly. This imbalance would shape everything that followed. Episode 17 marks a shift in scale. This is no longer the story of one colony. It is no longer the story of one leader. It is no longer the story of one war. It is the beginning of continental colonization, a system designed to expand forever. A system that required native disappearance to function. But even as the blueprint spread, resistance did not end. In episode 18, we will see native nations push back again, forming powerful alliances, launching new wars, and proving that conquest was never uncontested.